What are some NSFW history facts that don't get taught in school? In late imperial China, a concubine earmarked for sex by the emperor later at night would be pampered all day. When the night of the deed came, the palace servants stripped the girl naked, wrapped her in a silk blanket, and carried her to the emperor's bed to unwrap her there. This practice wasn't for imperial majesty's kinks. It was a security measure. Sometime earlier, a concubine tried to assassinate an emperor during sex with weapons hidden in her clothing. The chainsaw was originally invented to lob off infected limbs faster than a scalpel. Every time you read a city was sacked, pillaged, taken by force, or what have you, it almost always means mass rape, rampant murder, and an orgy of violence and debauchery. Enslaving a population, also pretty much the same thing. Men would be killed. Women and children would be abused, tied up and sold off, to be abused even further, until they were discarded. Human history is swollen with the sufferings of the common people subject to thievery, banditry, wanton murder, and abuse at the point of the sword. We are a pretty disgusting species. Queen Victoria instituted a system of certifying prostitutes as syphilis-free. They were called the Queen's Ladies of the Night. Many prostitutes hung the certificate above their beds as a point of pride. If you ever visit Prague, definitely go to the Sex Machines Museum. I felt so naive of how unaware I was about how horny we as a species have been. Since, literally, ever. The steam-powered dildo is a triumph of mechanical engineering. The political smear campaign against Marie Antoinette involved a lot of sticks. Roman brothels had pictures of the prostitutes' specialties above the door to their room. The father of microbiology, Antony van Leeuwenhoek, was the first to examine semen under a microscope immediately after ejaculating in his wife. The inventor of the bra had a pet whippet named Clitoris. Alexander the Great had 361 concubines, official prostitutes. 4 more and he would have one for every day of the year. 12-year-old Pocahontas used to entertain white colonists with nude cartwheels. This is actually one of the few things we know about her that's indisputable. French President Félix Faure went out via death by blowjob from a mistress. Edit. Fixed spelling. Early colonizers of the United States used corn cobs as toilet paper. Edit. This is now my #2 comment. James Joyce wrote exceptionally graphic letters to his D. Joe VI, former king of Portugal, had a royal masturbator. Cleopatra did bud stuff. Powdered wigs were invented to cover up head sores caused by syphilis. There was a Greek general who was supposed to lead a major expedition to Sicily. The night before he left, he got wasted and walked around Athens with his other drunk friends, and knocked all of the penises off of the statues in Athens. This caused him to be arrested. He missed the expedition, and they lost almost all of the men they sent to Sicily, because only he knew the plan well enough to pull it off. Archaeologists find lots of poop, and lots of dildos. Don't know if it's already been said, but Edgar Allan Poe married his 13-year-old cousin when he was very much older than her. Greeks were heavily into sodomy on both sexes. Women were only required to be virgins vaginally prior to marriage. Every other orifice was fair game. President Lyndon Johnson was obsessed with his stick and loved to show it to people. He called it Jumbo. During the Age of Sail, anytime a large ship would come into port, the men often wouldn't be allowed shore leave for a few days. So you would see small boats packed with prostitutes heading out to the ship at mooring. Larger ships of the line would have over 500 men aboard, so there could definitely be a couple hundred ladies brought aboard behind the captain's back. And with virtually no privacy aboard, you would have spaces in the ship with hundreds of couples going at it at once. There were definitely a lot of captains that didn't allow any women aboard. So the sailors on those ships would just have to wait until they could go ashore. Catherine the Great had a parlor room filled with explicit, erotic furniture she commissioned personally. We are talking blowjobs carved into chairs, An end table where giant sticks torrential cumshots were holding up a marble countertop. A woman getting eaten out by a demon on a throne. Home general had taste. Henry VIII, aside from his 3 legitimate children, had at least 6 other illegitimate kids with various mistresses. There is also a suit of armor made for him on display, and the codpiece alone weighs 1.3 kilograms. Newton was so dedicated to his work, and abhorred fun so much, that many people believe he died a virgin. At 87 years old. And by work I don't mean revolutionizing physics and inventing calculus. I mean alchemy. His main focus was turning lead into gold, and making the Philosopher's Stone. Ben Franklin was a super sex freak, and loved to tell younger dudes to have sex with old women. In the 12th century, a philosopher named Peter Abelard challenged the church teaching on sexual morality, pointing out that no ceremony of man could make an inherently immoral act moral. The act would have to be already generally moral. Therefore sex before marriage really couldn't be considered a mortal sin. He fell in love with the wrong woman, and had his nuts cut off. This made him angry and sad. He then wrote a book. Not necessarily NSFW, but pirates were one of the first people to have a healthcare plan of sorts. If you lost an appendage, there was a predetermined pay for everything that was lost or maimed. Also, there was a pretty large number of female pirates. For a time, when women had little to no value in the workplace, they more or less had equal treatment and pay to other pirates. Napoleon would ask that his wife, Josephine, not bathe for several days when he knew he would be coming home. My man's liked a stinky lady. At the Battle of Agincourt, most of the English archers fought pantsless because they had serious diarrhea and were literally crapting themselves as they fought. They won too. And Frank's diary talked a lot about masturbation, but most of it was edited out. To save ammunition, the Khmer Rouge started to execute people with pickaxes in the killing fields. Cleopatra was nicknamed Regina Meretrix, the Queen of the Whores. Jenny Wade was a prostitute and a madam. She wasn't a kind and generous soul who was treating the wounded from both sides of the Battle of Gettysburg. She was offering her services to both sides. When you take the bus tour with recorded audio, the storyteller narrating the tour is supposed an old-timer reflecting on the battle. When you pass the Jenny Wade house, still standing, he says something like, "That's the Jenny Wade house. Jenny was a friend of mine. She was a friend to many. I always liked that subtle nod." In any history course, the rampant raping done by most occupying forces around the world, e.g., Japan in WW2. French poet Victor Hugo got it on so much that the day of his funeral all the brothels in Paris closed because everybody was too busy mourning him. Japanese soldiers sliced open pregnant women to tear out unborn foetuses during the Nanjing massacre. Ancient Greece society was all about bad sex. It gets glossed over or referred to in a passing and vague way. In fact, part of the curriculum of well-off kids, from fancy Athenians to tough Spartans, was being poked from behind by your teacher/tutor. Child grooming was more or less systemic, a necessary step in life for most men. According to Christianity, Jesus ascended to heaven. Hence you might think that, according to Christianity, no body part of him should be found in earth. However, this does not include Jesus's foreskin, as Jesus was, and born as, Jewish. He was circumcised 8 days after birth. Hence, when Jesus, supposedly, ascended to heaven, his foreskin, known as the holy prepuce or the holy foreskin, remained in earth. Throughout the centuries, several churches claimed that they have the original holy foreskin, even several at the same time. The German army was given methamphetamines during their invasion of France/Belgium/Netherlands in 1940. This was the other part of "Blitzkrieg" that isn't really talked about. For the first 3 days the German army advanced without rest. No stopping or sleeping for 3 days straight. If you got tired they just gave you more meth. The drug may have also played a role in why the panzer divisions refused to stop, even after being ordered to several times by high command. They only finally stopped advancing when Hitler personally ordered the halt. TLDR. An army of methed up Nazis took down the largest army in Europe in a few weeks. Edit. Netflix has a good documentary series on it now. Plato thought that the babies inherited everything from their parents and therefore from perfect parents having intercourse at the perfect moment, would born perfect babies. Imagine an equilateral triangle with the parent in two of the corners and the baby in the third. He thought that these babies would be the superior race. Consequently, a political utopia would be originated from a genetic utopia. Napoleon's penis was preserved and sold for around $45,000 to be displayed in a museum or the purchaser's home. Benjamin Franklin slept his way through the wives of the French aristocracy, who in return convinced their husbands that supporting the American Revolution was a good idea. President Lyndon B. Johnson, as the name implies, was infamous for talking about his penis and boasting how big it was. There's a recording of Johnson arguing on the phone with pants manufacturers about how they failed to leave enough room for the crotch, and actively creating a detailed verbal picture of his presidential groin. When my high school history teacher asked the class what we knew about Johnson, my answer was not what he was looking for, but was what I felt the class needed. This actually got taught to me at school, but I think it still fits. At the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 there was allegedly this absolute unit of a Viking that was killing Saxons left, right and center using only an axe, killing roughly 40 Saxons. He was holding the bridge for some time before he was killed, and this is still somewhat debated amongst historians, by being stabbed in the balls by some Saxons that were floating below the bridge underneath the Viking. Edward II of England was a suspected homosexual and rumored to have been killed by having a red-hot poker shoved up his anus. Benjamin Franklin didn't care about his shrimpy wife, so after all the 1776 independence fervor, he moved to France without her. He said hasta la vista, and then banged a lot of broads. 4 popes actually died while having sexual intercourse, or as a result of. Pope Leo VII died of a heart attack during, and Pope Paul II, while being sodomized by an altar boy. Allegedly. 2 others were supposedly murdered by the cuckolded husband of their lovers. Thomas Jefferson had 6 kids with one of his slaves. Hedy Lamarr, she was first motion picture to include a nude scene, ecstasy, and have her orgasm. Later, she went on to invent frequency hopping, which eventually became CDMA and Wi-Fi. So her impact on sex and technology has shown her to be a true revolutionary with a long-standing impact. The number of times the true anatomy of the clitoris has been discovered, rediscovered, but deleted from the anatomy books. If you think the clitoris is this tiny external part, think again. It's a very large, mostly internal structure. But time and again it was deleted from anatomy books throughout the centuries. Homosexuals were not considered victims of the Holocaust, and after the war was over they were forced to finish their sentences, because homosexuality was still illegal in Germany under paragraph 175, meaning they were still at risk of being imprisoned and incinerated. Not generally talked or learned about in schools. Capt. Cook was killed shortly after his second landing at Kealakekka. After he wore out his welcome, he was killed, and the crew were forced to leave. What history books won't tell you is that parts of his body were ritualistically cannibalized, but not his hands or his penis. Those were sent back to his ship before it sailed away, as a message. Your works and your seed not welcome here. Susan B. Anthony was very racist against blacks. She wanted for only white women to have voting rights. Not all women. She said something like, I will not have the Negro vote before me. That the Greeks were hornier than the French, but the Egyptians outclassed them both. John F. Kennedy took the virginity of his 19-year-old intern, and had her give another guy a blowjob poolside. He was kinda a creepy dude in general. The rape of Nanking. That's definition NSFW. Rasputin from Russia got really into mysticism. So he went around the peasant population of Russia regularly having sex/orgies with anyone. Literally anyone, even men. As a form of cleansing. This guy's actually important in the fall of Tsarist Russia, because he befriended the Tsarina, and lived at the palace which tarnished the Tsar's image, but then got assassinated. Ponce de Leon was looking for the fountain of youth. That was a euphemism for looking for a cure to his impotence. Invading and conquering armies followed this script. Kill the men. Eat the pigs and rape the women. Gilles de Rais, a French lord and knight who used to lure children back to his place, torture them, decapitate them, skin them alive, and masturbate upon them. Why ships had cabin boys. Rasputin's penis is kept in a jar in a museum for public viewing. Edit. It's become quite evident the validity of this claim is debatable. Links to both sides of the argument have been posted. However, a majority leads me doubt the truth of my statement. False or not, it's still interesting to think someone deemed it worthy enough to put in a jar, to be displayed for public enjoyment _. Even if it is just a sea cucumber or horse phallus. It's funny to think on. This is one of the best Reddit threads ever. Apparently George Washington was so attractive that when he was 17 he went swimming in a creek and some girls stole his clothes so they could see him wander around half naked. IDK if it's true or not though. Rim jobs and other anal sex acts have existed a lot longer than toilet paper. Give that some thought lol. Tulsa race riots were omitted in Oklahoma.